What is up, everybody? I'm No Lux Given here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to be taking a look at tournament winning lists from the past week or so in Marvel Snap. It took me a while to put together this video, so apologies that it's basically coming at the very end of the season, but there is still time to use these decks to rank up or to complete an Infinity Conquest. If you enjoy this content, please let me know in the comments and with a like and subscription if you want to see more of it. I wanted to kick this video off with Blaster Dark's Devil Dinosaur Darkhawk list. This is the list that won the biggest event over the past 2 weeks, the Impulse Pro Series number 2. I think there was almost 190 competitors in that event, and this deck got first place. It is a Darkhawk Zabu list, Mrs. Marvel, Iron Lad. Those cards are all pretty core to the deck, but Blaster Dark also added Devil Dinosaur, Agent Coulson, and then Mystique. And I think that is the big one. Mystique allows you to copy Darkhawk and Mrs. Marvel for a surprising amount of ongoing power at a pretty cheap rate, especially with Zabu. On the final turn, you can play Mrs. Marvel plus Mystique. That's 25 power on the final turn of the game. I mean, Mrs. Marvel's kind of just busted, I think, anyways, the current season pass card. Maybe not the season pass card anymore, depending on when you're watching this. But Mrs. Marvel is just really good if you haven't picked it up already. Like myself, I haven't picked up Mrs. Marvel, so I won't be able to showcase footage of myself playing this deck, though I do have 2 really fun clips from the finals to showcase, so I'll roll those now.
Okay, that's a good snow guard.
Whoa! Whoa!
It pulled it.
Okay.
Agent Coulson pulled the Loki.
Okay.
Well, we got to see a Loki in the finals.
Gearing up. Season 3 right here, man. Oh my god.
We got to see a Loki as you wanted.
Yeah, I saw a Loki in the finals, guys.
Yeah,
There we go.
take
9
it
on the
down.
right.
Like we said.
The Hawk. 9 on the right. Miss Marvel pushes it up to 14. Doom pushes it to 17 on the right. Doom is 17 right.
Yeah.
13 left. And what's 5 plus 3 plus 2 plus 15 mid. That might be enough though.
Yes. It definitely might be.
So we are looking at 13 left, 15 mid, 17 right. Alright, let me say that again. 13 left, 15 mid, 17 right.
17
It's the
right.
only play.
Yep, it is the
You
best
can't
play for them.
It's the only play.
All right.
Alright, for all
There
the
it
Marvel
goes.
Pro Series 2. Oh!
Yeah, I saw the message. Oh,
Taskmaster!
Taskmaster comes in
Wow!
from Agent Coulson, copying the Dino, taking KX out, ladies and gentlemen.
that it?
What?
I had the chance to talk with Blaster Dark, aka Quiet Tanger, after his first place finish, and he said that Agent Coulson is just a favorite card of his exactly for moments like that, and it was just really fun to pull off some lucky moments that your opponents might not be expecting, and just also be able to drop a bunch of power with Devil Dinosaur. Now, Devil Dinosaur can be a little bit tricky if you're expecting to play up against a lot of Loki decks, but luckily for Blaster Dark, he didn't play up against a bunch of Loki. In the 8 Swiss rounds of this tournament, he played up against fellow Darkhawk decks 5 times, played against Loki twice. He went 1-1 against Loki, beat Darkhawk all 5 times though, and that was the important thing that got him into the top 8 and then eventually won him the whole event. I do want to take a look at the other options that we have here for Darkhawk decks, and basically this is all 3 of the card choices from all 3 of the Darkhawk Zabu lists in the top 4 of the event. The top 4 was almost entirely made up of Darkhawk, with 1 bounce deck that also included Darkhawk, but we'll take a look at that in a moment. And all other decks that we're going to take a look at in this video will feature gameplay as well from myself. I just don't own Mrs. Marvel, so I can't show you guys this gameplay or gameplay with this deck. Still free to play, but these decks all have half of the deck that these guys can agree on. Korg, Darkhawk, Zabu, Rockslide, Mrs. Marvel, and Iron Lad, all really powerful cards. Iron Lad, being able to copy Mrs. Marvel or Darkhawk is just extremely powerful, and being able to copy Doctor Doom is similarly powerful. We see a little bit more tech in some of the other lists. Shadow King, Killmonger, one of the players also chose to play Invisible Woman and Shang-Chi, with the other choosing to go for Alioth with, Alioth. With Alioth and Doctor Doom kind of covering all your bases on the final turn of the game and making it really tough to figure out how your opponents want to play around that. What's interesting though, with the winning list from Blaster Dark, we see no destroy cards, no Killmonger, Shang-Chi, or even Shadow King. It's all just about putting as much power as you possibly can out onto the board, and in the mirror match, that was what won it. So hard to say that it was not correct to do so. This could certainly be a choice, especially if you yourself are playing up against a lot of Darkhawk. I think that in particular might make it a better tournament deck than it would a Conquest deck or a ladder deck, but I still had to showcase it because it's the winning deck from the biggest tournament over the past 2 weeks. And then we have Loki, the most represented deck across the 4 tournaments that I looked at in the past week or so. I was able to grab data for 5 of those winning deck lists, plus a 6th one that we'll take a look at in just a moment. But for these 5 traditional Loki lists, we'll call them, there were 5 cards that all players could agree on: Maria, Snowguard, Collector, Loki, and America, with most players also choosing to play both Nico and Werewolf. Really strong cards. I think that maybe the players that didn't play those cards didn't have them. That's definitely a possibility. Talked about both of those cards, Werewolf specifically, in my Annihiloki video recently. By the way, I will probably have a follow-up video for Annihiloki coming soon. Like I said, just been busy. Cut, Carnage, add Collector. Collector's really good, should probably just be in every Loki list, like these players agree. Maybe America as well, to be totally honest. Just increase your chances of drawing Loki. Most people probably know how strong this card is. Loki and Werewolf are probably still looking to get nerfed, and I should mention that I think Mrs. Marvel could do for a nerf too, if my thoughts on that weren't super clear. The one thing that I did want to bring up when we're looking at Loki lists is that decks either play Quinjet or they play Beast. So you can play Quinjet, we see that here with Agent 13 and Agent Coulson for a little bit of additional card generation, or we see Beast potentially paired with Forge and the Hood, as well as just tech cards being thrown in to complement the list. I think Shang-Chi is a lot more popular in Loki lists than it would appear just from this data. I typically see at least one tech card show up in various Loki lists, but most of these just opting not to play tech at all and just go for more card generation and Beast shenanigans, and then Quinjet for like an alternate to Loki that I think is really fun. And speaking of an alternate to Loki, I want to take a look at one Loki deck in particular. So this crazy Loki list, I call it Zabu Loki, but it's Johnson's Loki list from the Impulse Pro Series 2 tournament, and Johnson actually did well with it in a previous event as well. And we can see it's got some crazy stuff going on. Hellcarrier, not a super common card, but if you can guarantee discard it with Lady Sif, it'll add some cards to your hand, power up your Collector, and then you can reanimate the Hellcarrier with Ghost Rider, which is just a ton of power, even if you aren't doing anything with those extra cards that you grab off of the Hellcarrier. We're gonna snap, we've got a pretty good curve with this hand, and I think that this game in particular just really showcases exactly what you can do with this deck. Had to do the math there to see if it was better to play the Collector into Muir Island to get 1 extra point on it every turn, or play it into Nebula, and it definitely just makes more sense to play it into Muir Island here. So we'll probably ignore my opponent's Nebula, as awkward as that is. This turn I'm going to drop Lady Sif into Muir Island. That will discard the Hellcarrier and fill up my hand with a bunch of random stuff. But the key card in this game, this is a spicy game as well. This is definitely a fun one, in addition to just being able to showcase the cool stuff that this deck has got going on. My opponent is going to Iron Lad and hit Super Scroll, which opens up a really interesting opportunity for this deck, which does not typically play ongoing effects, but was able to grab Red Skull out of the hub. Yeah, we're going to be able to get a little bit silly with that. So turn 4, I'm going to play Quinjet and then Luke Cage and Human Torch. I don't want to fill up Muir Island right away necessarily, though I could, because we can still add more power to Muir Island through adding cards to my hand through the collector, but also by playing Red Skull and pumping up my opponent's Iron Lad. So kind of a silly thing. We are going to give my opponent a Quinjet this turn, but I thought it was still important to just make my Red Skull a little bit cheaper, give me some more opportunities. It's just going to let me play Nova plus one of my 4-cost cards here. So I'm going to play Ghost Rider into Xandar, get back that 10 power Hellcarrier, and then I'm going to play Nova into Muir Island, which is a 5 power Nova. It'll get 2 power from Muir Island, and then potentially 2 more power if we decide to play that Red Skull. So now you can see we are crushing it in Xandar. That's the main reason I wanted to showcase this game, but it is just going to be a really sweet game overall, because we're playing to win right now in the hub by dropping Red Skull in that location, and we are actually flipping the Muir Island back in our favor as well. I could have gone for Red Skull in Xandar. I think that could have been a smart play as well, but I decided to just go for Red Skull into the hub. That way I'm threatening my opponent in all 3 locations, and it just makes it a little bit more difficult for them to turn it around on us. So fun game, really fun deck. It's also a Loki deck, which we didn't really talk about in this game. I figured you can see enough Loki anywhere else, and clips of it aren't really that important because it just plays your opponent's deck. One thing I do think is really cool though is Nick Fury out of this deck. Nick Fury plus Quinjet, I do think is like a somewhat real combination of cards. And then you also have Zabu to make Ghost Rider, Loki, and Nick Fury all a little bit cheaper. And one of the things that just does is allows you to play those cards on the final turn to pump up your collector. So I've seen a few games where that can happen, but for this game, we're going to be winning it with Red Skull on the final turn here. My opponent gives us Xandar. They also give us a few cards with Maximus. And they are actually going to beat us in the hub, but when their Super Scroll steals my Red Skull ability, we are going to be able to take them in Muir Island. Next up, we've got Silver Bullet, which I made a mistake earlier. Silver Bullet actually top 4'd the 170 person event, and Bounce top 8'd. We'll take a look at Bounce in just a moment, but for this game we are going to be playing Silver Bullet, which is a really cool Silver Surfer list that plays a bunch of on reveal 3-cost cards to trigger Werewolf by Night, including Snowguard. Brought that up a little bit earlier. Snowguard was the most played card in the list that I looked at over this past week or so, and definitely I'd say like underrated, a little bit under the radar, just because people, I don't think they're like not playing it when they should be. I just don't think that anybody realizes that everybody's playing it, and it's just like a ridiculously overplayed card right now. But this list also plays Kraven, and then a bunch of interesting move tech cards that are on 3. Polaris, Spider-Man, and Juggernaut to kind of mess with your opponent a little bit of additional tech as well in the form of Spider-Ham, and Jeff just to be a flexible card that can also move into Kraven. I do think that Medusa could see some play in this list, and I'm not totally sold on the Serra, but it's a lot of people do like Sarah in Silver Surfer, and it is good alongside Killmonger and alongside Shadow King, just to be able to make sure that you don't have priority going into the final turn. Though I kind of like having priority right now, especially with all of the Alioth lockdown lists that you'll see. But this game, we get to just really see all of the synergies come together. We're going to play a Polaris into our center location that's going to drag in my opponent's Maria Hill, which will then trigger their it will trigger my Craven, and then it will also trigger my Werewolf, which will again trigger my Craven. So Craven can get really big in this. You do have to watch out that you don't Shadow King your Craven or your Werewolf unless you really need to. I guess Sarah would be the best draw here this turn, but we will take the Shadow King here now. And don't actually remember what the play is. Okay, Spider-Man to bring Werewolf back into the Baxter building, and then I'm going to play Shadow King just to take my Werewolf out of the Baxter building going into that final turn of the game. Ideally, Spider-Man hits Medusa and brings it right, so that way, or the Jessica Jones actually, come to think of it. And then we can Shadow King either one of those. Not super likely that that will happen, and Spider-Man decides to go left anyways and grab Maria Hill. So that's definitely not happening here. But Werewolf will still go into where Spider-Man activated, so that'll pull Werewolf center before I pull him back to the right. And I'm only losing by 2 in that center location. Here's a great example where priority might have been a little bit more important, because we could have used priority with Juggernaut, which is a really powerful effect. But final turn of the game, I'm just going to play Juggernaut plus Silver Surfer. Have to decide where I want to throw the Werewolf as well. That'll go wherever Silver Surfer goes typically, because that's generally going to be the last card of the game that you played. But if I Juggernaut my opponent out of the center location, I should be able to win Baxter Building, and I'm currently also battling for Lemuria as well as battling for Mount Vesuvius, because if my opponent wants to play into those other locations, they're probably going to wind up shrinking their Devil Dinosaur. So again, just playing for all 3 locations, I think is like a fairly well-rounded way to play. It's not always going to be correct, and it's generally interesting. It's with Werewolf by Night, there is just a lot of opportunity to play for multiple locations at the same time. Unfortunately, my opponent's going to Shang-Chi me here, though that will cause them to use most of their energy for the final turn of the game. We're going to Juggernaut them out of the Baxter building, and already, even without Silver Surfer, we've won the game. But with Silver Surfer, we get to put a little bit more power on top of it. That's a pretty good showing for Silver Bullet. Lastly, we're going to take a look at a game with Bounce. This is a deck that a lot of top players really enjoy, and I will say that I can't really include myself in them. I think that this deck is a deceptively difficult deck to play, and it's not really one that I have taken the time personally to master, which is why we are going to lean really hard on the Nexus in this game. That's going to take all the guesswork out of it. We just have to win the Nexus, and then we'll win the other locations. And that, I think, is one of the difficult parts of playing Bounce, is figuring out where to distribute your points to. Also figuring out when and where to play your cards. Do you want to stack up on, your early plays in the game really matter, because Beast bounces all the cards in a given location. So it's important to stack your cards up appropriately so that you can return them and get some nice stuff done. I draw Falcon on turn 3 as well as Werewolf by Night thanks to Nova Roma. So I'm just going to throw down the Werewolf on this turn, and then I'll maybe worry about how to make Beast and Falcon and stuff work. And already we can see a little bit of awkwardness. If I wanted to next turn play like Korg and then Beast my Korg and my Nico, I would also wind up bouncing my Werewolf. So it's a little bit awkward, but I do have a lot of power here, so I am going to snap going into the 5th turn of the game. And I think I'm just going to play a bunch of 1-cost cards and then return them to my hand. So that way I've got a huge Werewolf, and I'll make an even bigger Werewolf after bouncing these cards and replaying them in future turns. And then I'll just try to throw that werewolf into the Nexus for that final turn of the game, and hopefully if it can dodge Shang-Chi, then we will be able to have a ton of power. Just werewolf in that center location, you can see briefly is winning me the game, but then I'm going to throw it over to Nova Roma up against some type of Moon Girl, Zabu, Quinjet list. That's one card that wasn't in Johnson's Loki deck, interestingly, was Moon Girl. Moon Girl plus Zabu, I think, could be pretty cool. But Moon Girl's a tough one to make work. You need to have a bunch of cheap cards that aren't adding cards to your hand, so yeah, it can be tough to make all of those synergies come together. And now I am just trying to appropriately figure out what I want to commit to various locations here. If I want to play Beast, if I want to play Black Widow, I also have to play that this turn. And this can be another really tricky thing with the with the bounce decks. And you can see I'm like deliberately not bouncing the werewolf here. I'm not bouncing it and also not moving it by playing Korg first, where the Falcon already is, so that way I can Beast, return this Korg, and return this Falcon. Mainly just a free Korg. I think will go really well with Darkhawk into the Nexus for the final turn of the game, and then Nico also transforms into the Demon transformation spell. We get to make a pretty cool combo on this final turn of the game. Again, just trying to put as much power as possible into that center location. I'm going to Bast to throw a Demon over into Nova Roma. That's going to, or maybe I'll change that up a little bit. I'm not super sure. Looks like that is going to go center, and then I'm going to Korg center, and yeah, this makes the most sense. The Demon Bast will not trigger Werewolf. That's something important to know. I brought that up in my Annihiloki video as well. But yeah, transformation effects. And I also brought that up in my Tarnax 4 short, which not too many people saw. I thought that was a cool video. Showed off some fun stuff there, but I digress. We're going to be putting a Demon, a Korg, a Werewolf, and a huge Darkhawk into the Nexus, which takes out all the guesswork. And yeah, otherwise you have to make a lot of decisions over where to put your points on the final turn, which is why a lot of top players really like this deck. We can see a really good result here from my opponent, putting so much power into the Nexus. Mrs. Marvel isn't quite going to work, but 2 She-Hulks for a total of 28 power, which would like normally be enough. You know, it's going to be smaller than my Werewolf and my Demon and my Korg. Once Werewolf hops over there, we will definitely be winning all 3 locations, and then Darkhawk shows up for an additional 17. My opponent has a little bit more power out of Sunspot, but it's not going to be enough, and Bounce is able to take it. That's going to be it for me today, guys. Those are the top decks of the week. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm No Lex Given. Peace.